Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the R Squared Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Akash. You can find me on Twitter at YZR_fantasy.
And I'm Ian, and you can find me at Dynasty_IM on Twitter.
We're here to break down Week 9, look at some season-long trends, identify some buys and sells as well for Dynasty, and break down metrics and stats from the season and from the weeks. So just started off, jump in immediately with the Thursday night game from last week. We had the Jets against the Colts. Since the bye week, Elijah Moore has around 17 points per game. He's had a couple of touchdowns, bolstered that, but it's on a 14% target share. I know it seems like his points per game is too high for his target share, and it probably is, but it's not any reason to worry about it and think that it's low because it lines up with a lot of other good beta wide receivers in their rookie seasons like Calvin Ridley, Brandon Cooks, Will Fuller, Tyler Boyd, Desean Jackson, Percy Harvin. This is a good career trajectory for Elijah Moore. I'm happy to see it. Michael Carter and Ty Johnson came back down to earth without Mike White, who left early in the game. We know that a lot of RB targets depend on the quarterback because some quarterbacks just like checking down more. And we had an idea that Carter's recent explosion was in part due to Mike White being checked down Charlie, but without White, Carter suffered. With Wilson, Carter's target share has been around 8% to 10%, which is pretty good for a rookie running back. He's splitting carries with Ty Johnson like a 60-40 or 70-30 split. Long term, there's probably some concerns about if he can be a starter because we know that these day 3 guys can get replaced pretty easily by the teams. I think that their 2022 RB1 isn't on the team right now, but for the rest of the season, Michael Carter's probably a low RB2 or a high RB3.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think we nailed what was going on with Michael Carter those couple weeks right on the head because Mike White left and he was left with 3.8% target share on the week, like you said. So I think we kind of nailed that one. And then looking at Indianapolis in this game, Jonathan Taylor just ran all over these guys. He's RB5 on the year in points per game on 61.9% opportunity and 10.1% target share, which really says a lot about his talent because that is good usage, but to get high-end fantasy RB production with that usage just means you're that talented. And then looking at Wentz, he's been serviceable. He's a 69.6 on the season, so he's kind of playing like a Jimmy Garoppolo, one would say. He's being a serviceable quarterback for someone like Pittman to explode because they're not passing it a crazy low amount of times. And Pittman still 24.7% target share on the season, 2.22 yards per team pass attempt, and wide receiver 16 on the season. I did have a thing on Michael Pittman where you posted a poll about how he's worth. Would you take that or an early first? And they seem to match up in terms of assets. That for early first and Michael Pittman seem to match up on KTC right next to each other, keep trade cut. But I think because Pittman, there's not a lot of room to grow from wide receiver 13 on keep trade cut, and we know early first round picks will grow a ton. They'll grow considerable amounts until February, March, April when that pick is worth a lot, especially a high first where you know you're going to get some studs in the draft because Pittman has been really good, but for him to automatically jump up to wide receiver 13 and keep trade cuts just a little aggressive for me.
Yeah, he jumped up into the top 12 recently. Like people are treating him as a wide receiver 1. He's producing well, playing well. Target share a bit lower, and he's had some touchdown luck over the last couple of weeks. I'd like to flip him into like Deonte Johnson or T. Higgins, but that's just me. Like I think that he can hover around like wide receiver. Like there's a lot of fluidity in the tiers between like wide receiver 12 and wide receiver 18, it would seem. There's a lot of movement in that range. So if you can move down and get like an extra pick or an extra player, it's always good in that range to get quantity over quality because there's a lot of movement in opinions based on week-to-week performance. Next game, the Browns against the Bengals. Without Odell Beckham Jr., Baker had his best game of the season. This week, in Week 9, he had the second best PFF passing grade. He was third in completion percentage over expected. I'm firmly in the camp of Baker being a good player and good at throwing a football. The low volume obviously hurts. This is something that we've known for a while. Long term, I still buy talent. I'm still buying that Baker's talented, so I'm buying Baker Mayfield. I just saw Drew post a thread on how if a player is being held back by their situation and they're not reaching their full potential, then you should be buying that player. I think that's absolutely the case with Baker Mayfield. I think his price on Keep Your Cuts like QB20 or something. It's pretty low.
He's down to like QB23. If I just
It's crazy for a guy that's been playing well since he entered the league, except for a few games with Kitchens and OBJ. Something just didn't click with OBJ and Baker Mayfield. I don't know what it was, because normally when you put two good players together, they perform really well. But for some reason, it didn't work with them. But now they're separated. I think it's arrows up for both of them. But without OBJ this week, Jarvis Landry was the wide receiver one. Obviously, he's in the slot a lot. He had a 26% target share. He has a 25% target share or higher in 3 out of 4 of his healthy games. But it's really, really hard to like in a low volume offense with an average depth of target of 7.9. It's just very little upside. Donovan Peoples-Jones and Anthony Schwartz operating as a wide receiver two. They had 15 and 16 routes respectively. 65% route participation, 70% route participation. They're both on the field. You can take shots on both of them in deep leagues. They're probably already rostered, but they're both just stashes. Demetric Felton, he was drafted, I think, as a RB wide receiver hybrid, but he's not being used a lot. But when he is on the field, he's being used a lot more as a wide receiver than an RB. He's 13 snaps at the RB position, but 59 at the wide receiver position. It doesn't matter for this year, but if you're stashing Felton or he's on waivers, you could look to maybe pick him up just because he very well maybe, I don't know, their slot receiver of the future. Who knows? Jarvis Landry, there's very little money committed to him long term. They can get out pretty easily. All the tight ends are just a mess. They've run 50% routes or less this week. I'm not interested. They're gross. I like Harrison Bryant as a deep dynasty sleeper, but really nothing I like.
Yeah, I did think it was funny this week that Mayfield posted his best PFF passing grade of the season at 87.7, and it came just after his breakup with OBJ. It's clearly not the only game that OBJ missed this season, but just kind of an interesting wrinkle, I would say.
Well, weeks 1 through 3, he was playing pretty well. And
yeah.
OBJ played in week 3, but then with OBJ, it's really just been bad. It's like a stark contrast in his performance with and without.
Yeah, it's really quite odd, actually, but it's neither here nor there because we both think both players are talented, so it was just kind of a funny situation that wasn't working the way we expected. Looking at Cincinnati in this matchup, who got absolutely blown out, Joe Burrow's still good. There's definitely no reason to panic, and I don't think really many's panicked because we haven't seen his value drop off or anything like that after this game, which it shouldn't, but 85 PFF pass grade on the season, ranks 8th amongst all passers, and he's throwing to some of the best weapons in the game, and Chase, T. Higgins, Joe Mixon, even Tyler Boyd. That's one of the reasons why Drew would always say, or still says, you're too low on Joe Burrow, because he has all the weapons, and he's a good passer, and we're finally seeing an uptick in pass attempts, which is something that we really want to see in an offense with this many studs. Chase last week, 31.7% target share. That is straight alpha. It's really impressive to see, especially because we already know he's a prestigious rookie, but to do what he's doing right now is just insane. I looked over, because he was a league winner prospect for me, and looking over all the league winner wide receiver prospects, he would only fall if the season were to end today and he finished with a 24.6% target share like he has. The only rookie wide receiver he would trail that's a league winner prospect, Odell Beckham Jr. And we know OBJ was valued as a wide receiver one, or the wide receiver one, for a long time. And I think that's exactly what we should expect with Jamar Chase. And the production is going to lead to a lot of wide receiver one, a lot of top 5 finishes. And I think someone else who can get in on that once everything starts clicking is T. Higgins, 23.1% target share in the year. I think he actually increases a little bit from there. We're kind of seeing Tyler Boyd become the odd man out, which is to be expected. But since Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are both on the field alphaing, it's become a hassle for Tyler Boyd to find targets or earn targets, because there's not a lot available once those two alphas get their share. He's still a good receiver. I think people may overreact eventually where he becomes underrated rather than overrated like he has been in the past. It just shows how quick situations can change. And then just touch up on Joe Mixon, RB8 in points per game, 73.6% opportunity share on the year. Just really good stuff, especially from someone who's injury prone, which is always funny for knocking someone.
I know, it was always hilarious. All the Joe Mixon narratives all over the offseason. It finally suppressed his ADP, which led to me getting some more of him, which is terrific because he's been playing so well this year. It just shows how much of RB production is really tied to how good the offense is. Sometimes, like when the offense gets better, you can see RBs get better. There's obviously not a huge impact, but it does help, obviously. And so Joe Mixon is an RB1 when people are saying that he's bad at football. He's definitely not bad at football, and that's something that we've all been hammering throughout the entire offseason and this season, that the opportunity is terrific. Just go by the opportunity. Then the next game, the Broncos against the Cowboys. I'm not concerned with the couple game sample of Sutton not doing as well with Judy on the field. I think Judy does take away some of the ceiling just because he and Tim Patrick are good wide receivers. I still think that Sutton, I'm not going to deviate from my takes just because of a couple games Sutton not doing well. I still think he's the best receiver there, but I would just hold him for now. 12% target share over the last couple of weeks isn't ideal, obviously, but it's not something to panic about. Javonte Williams is still splitting with Melvin Gordon. There's upside this season if Melvin was to get hurt or if they suddenly decide to move on and phase him out throughout the rest of the season, but I'm still expecting a continued split for the rest of the season, barring any injuries or any odd circumstances. But Javonte Williams on the season has a juke rate of 34%, which is absolutely terrific. And courtesy of B-Roto Fantasy Football, he's 12th in rushing yards over expected per attempt with a minimum of 30 carries out of 66 running backs, which is absolutely fantastic. And his targets per route run at 20%, which shows his upside. He has bell cow upside. If you liked Cam Akers in the last offseason before the injury, you'll love Javonte Williams this season because it's everything that we liked about Cam Akers, plus the fact that Javonte Williams is running really, really well as a rookie running back. It's huge upside.
Yeah, and to hit on your Sutton point one more time, there's no reason to veer off from two bad games. Like, you don't see anyone backing off Mike Evans despite being more prolific after some sub 10% target share game. So games are going to happen because there's a lot of variance, and I wouldn't blame it all on Judy because the biggest ceiling capper to Sutton is just this offense's volume when it comes to passing, because we're seeing them continually throw it under 30 times a game. And when you have weapons like Judy, like Fant, like Sutton, it's really hard to get good production when they need targets and volume, and those aren't coming because of the whole offense not throwing a lot. So that's more of a ceiling capper than Judy being there himself, because we know that wide receivers can produce alongside each other.
Yeah.
Looking at Dallas, which is another good reason to show that two wide receivers can produce alongside each other, because we have CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper. The CD is impressing, though, being the alpha on the team. I don't think it's too far-fetched to have thought that at the beginning of the season, because Amari Cooper has been someone who's what we call a fake alpha, where he sits around that 20 to 22% target share just year in, year out. This season's no different. He's a 21.8% target share, 1.91 yards per team pass attempt. So he's good. He's performing like a fake alpha on a good offense. But it's CD with a 24% target share, which is borderline just alpha numbers, which is also really good to see from CeeDee Lamb, whose kind of big knock was his size. Ezekiel Elliott, RB10 on the season. There's a lot of volume to be had for him on the season. 61.7% of the ops, 10.9% target share. That's kind of that good usage that I was talking about with Jonathan Taylor, where you have a good player and they get that kind of usage, they're going to produce RB1 numbers like Ezekiel Elliott's doing. And then one more point on this offense, because we did see Blake Jarwin go down on IR, but it wasn't encouraging to see Dalton Schultz had a 12.8% target share this week with him out. So I don't think, if there are some people who were really liking Dalton Schultz and they loved him when Blake Jarwin's out, I think you can tamper the brakes on that one.
Yeah, there's it's like you said with just variance for Dalton Schultz. Sometimes you just have a not great game on the season. I still expect some mid tight end one numbers. His target share is just going to be around that, like over the season. I expect it to be like in the 16 to 20% range, which will lead to low tight end one numbers or high tight end one numbers if you fall into the end zone enough times. Just because a lot of there's not a lot separating a high tight end one from a low tight end one, pretty much. But nothing
Yeah,
worry about adults. His value will stay around the same range.
I think his value will be around there, but that doesn't change that he's still a wasteland tight end, which is,
Definitely.
I mean, you could start wasteland tight ends, and especially ones that are in good offenses, and I'll see like that 16 to 20% target share because there's not a lot of good tight ends. So it's definitely not bad production to have, but with Blake Jarwin being out, that doesn't catapult him out of the tight end wasteland that there is.
Oh yeah, definitely agree there. This is a bad game for the whole offense in general. Not something to worry about. Like the Dak miss on some throws, some garbage time touchdowns to Malik Turner. I always get him and Malik Taylor confused. One's on the Packers, one's on the Cowboys. Neither of them really matter for fantasy, but they're both there. But yeah, not really a game that matters for Dallas. You can just read this one off. I think the other team in Texas that writes every game off, the Texans, played the Dolphins this week. So normally I know how the games go, but this is one that I didn't see it on Red Zone. I didn't care about it. So I just looked at the what happened in the game. And Cooks is still buy low. He has 30% target share or higher in 5 out of 9 of his games this year. That is pretty elite range. That's like only a few wide receivers can say that on the year. This week, I only connected on less than half of his 13 targets, but still 13 targets. That's terrific volume. There's just going to be volume and QB questions for the rest of the year, which makes him a buy just because whenever your situation is holding a player back, it makes them a buy. He still sees a tremendous target share, great upside. Nico Collins, I think, is a stash in really deep leagues, probably rostered in dynasty leagues, but 77% route participation this week, 65% in every week since returning from his injury. His only real competition for the wide receiver 2 role is Danny Amendola, and I think Nico Collins is pushing him aside. It's not a feat to push Danny Amendola aside, but when you're on the field, it lends itself to more opportunities. It's better than not getting on the field. So I think he's a decent stash in case he makes some plays or ends up seeing more targets. But on the backfield, this is the worst backfield ever. David Johnson has some receiving work. He sees a decent amount of routes, but there's really nothing else I care about just because this bunch of inefficient rushers who split the volume all the time, and sometimes they all see less than 50% of the snaps, sometimes I see 30%, 20%. This is not an offense, like a backfield that I care about for fantasy football.
Yes, definitely was not a good game because we already know that Houston's, in fact, not very friendly for fantasy. And then we have Miami on the other side who decided they weren't going to play with Tua, no Fonte Parker, no Will Fuller. So what that led to was a 25.6% target share from Waddle. And the encouraging part was to see a 9.8 ADOT because we know right now that Waddle's 6.5 ADOT on the season is pretty concerning because despite getting targets, they're not exactly being earned because when they're closer to the line of scrimmage, they're more likely to be manufactured. But seeing a 25.6% target share last week on a healthy ADOT is really encouraging to see from someone like Jalen Waddle, who there is that red flag about how far his targets are from the line of scrimmage and how fantasy friendly his targets really are. And then Gaskin was the other piece in this game. 86.7% of the ops, 15.4% of the target share. That's the high-end usage that Gaskin is capable of getting any given week. And that's exactly why, as contenders, you pay like late seconds to get someone like a Myles Gaskin because they're locked into this high-usage role. So someone that you should have as a contender. It's hard to now because most of them are already on contenders. But yeah, when in the offseason, when you get a veteran like this who's not being replaced and has shown that he can get the usage like he did last year, well, not veteran, but not a high-end, high rookie pick, someone later who we see get the usage, for them not to add anyone and then expect it not to carry on is kind of asinine.
Yeah, him and Michael Carter have very similar usage. They're both receiving backs. They're both not. They both have okay size. They're just on the border of like the size that we want to see for some decent like RB2 numbers. They're both good receivers. They both have job security questions for 2022, but Gaskin is a lot cheaper. So it's like the same thing, but one is a rookie that everyone was a lot higher on at the beginning of the season, and one was a guy that a lot of people wrote off just because they brought Malcolm Brown in. and that made people disinterested for some reason. But nonetheless, Gaskin is an RB2 for the rest of the season and a cheap buy for contenders. Next game, the Falcons versus Saints. Very happy that the Falcons won this one. It's terrific. Cordell Patterson is now my favorite player in the NFL just because he clutched up on that game. Speaking of Patterson, he's getting used as a wide receiver. 45% of his snaps pretty much in games that Ridley's missed, including this one. It's extremely encouraging, extremely encouraging because this is basically cheat code usage. It's like a Konami code for RBs when they're used as a wide receiver this much. And for this on the season, it's going to lead to RB1 numbers. It's the cheapest RB1 that you can find in all of fantasy football. You start him at wide receiver, depending on your platform. If you need to, it's just a tremendous buy at like wide receiver 40 or RB 40 prices for Cordell Patterson for a win now team. Matt Ryan is the QB. I know some people don't know what's gonna happen with him, but I think he's a QB for 2022 and maybe beyond. The contract makes it hard for the contract makes it hard for the Falcons to move on. They have an out, but it results in a lot of dead cap. In weeks 1 and 2, we brought up that his average depth of target was really bad. It was second last in the NFL. We got worried. He wasn't producing well. But since then, weeks 3 to 9, he is a very normal 7.8 average depth of target, leads all QBs in EPA plus completion percentage over expected composite and PFF passing grade, which is phenomenal. He's playing really well. Kyle Pitts has a 22% target share in games without Calvin Ridley. He's going to end up as a top 5 tight end. He's already catapulting up dynasty ranks. I think his upside is tremendous. I know some people advocate for selling him. I don't know. You have to detach emotion from fantasy football, but the upside is just so high for Kyle Pitts that I wouldn't sell just yet. You can maybe see if over the offseason his price rises to top 5, maybe I'll consider it. But for right now, I'm still loving Kyle Pitts' usage right now.
Yeah, I'm just holding Kyle Pitts because he's just having a historic rookie season. So, and we're not seeing him in the top 5 overall, which for a tight end is already pretty crazy. Yeah, so if something like that were to happen, I guess it could be a question. But right now, there's really no need to sell, especially.
I know like some people don't like it when you call him a wide receiver, but he is lining up like one a lot. And if you treat him as such and look at his target share, it's comparable to no good tight end seasons, right? Because there's no tight end who's ever had this kind of season as a rookie. But if you compare him to rookie wide receivers, it gives you an immense ceiling. So,
yeah, and for someone like that at tight end, which is something we need in fantasy, which is because we don't care about tight ends blocking. So a tight end that can line up, like you said, and is producing like a high-end rookie wide receiver is something we love to see.
Yeah.
Looking at New Orleans, though, they really don't have any receiving minus Alvin Kamara. And when we look at Alvin Kamara since Ingram joined the offense, the first 7 weeks, it was 77.4% of the ops, 22.4% target share. And now we're looking at 60.6% of the ops and 14.3% target share. I still think he gets a lion's share of receiving work, but I don't think it's crazy to think that his op share of 77.4% once Ingram joined the offense was bound to go down, because the problem with Kamara was that there was no one that they trusted behind him, and they usually don't like having Kamara run. So when they had someone who's been in the system before and they liked him, it's not crazy to see that the carries are going down for him. And because of that, we're seeing a few less targets because he's not on the field as much, but it still wheels up for Alvin Kamara. We've seen him with Ingram before and know just how talented he is. And when the other leading receiver is Marquez Callaway and Deonte Harris, it really shouldn't scare you off. It's just an interesting thing to see and something that we should have expected or did expect when Ingram joined. And just talk about how bad the receiving is on this team. Not a single player on this team has a 20% target share on the season. The highest non-Alvin Kamara player is Marquez Callaway at 15.9%. So it's just not great to see.
Wow, that is bad. I didn't know it was that bad, but I expected it to be that bad. Their weapons without Michael Thomas are absolutely horrible. There are rumors that OBJ could be signing with them. like they're in the running to sign OBJ. I should say it's not confirmed that they're the guys, but it's also the Packers and the Patriots. So you monitor that, because if OBJ lands there, he's, I think, at the worst, like a top 36 wide receiver again, and probably could easily be a top 24 wide receiver again, just because there's no one else, and he's a really talented wide receiver, and he'll become, I don't know, somewhat of a relative target funnel compared to his last years in Cleveland. But I will say that I think it's worth monitoring the QB situation for the Saints, just because Trevor Siemian is a bad QB, we can safely say. And if they do decide to roll with Taysom Hill, I don't know why they rolled with Siemian. Maybe it was because Hill was coming off of concussion protocol. They didn't want to immediately throw him out there as the starting QB. But if they do move to Taysom Hill, he threw to running backs a lot less when he started his 4 games last year. So it's just something to monitor, because I think that could take away some of the floor for Alvin Kamara, and maybe the ceiling too. The next game, the Las Vegas Raiders against the New York Giants. Desean Jackson is getting signed to replace Henry Ruggs, I guess. They cut Henry Ruggs after the DUI resulting in death incident. So with the Desean Jackson signing, he's probably still got burst. Otherwise, why would a team sign him if he was washed up completely? So the offense probably looks the same, probably acts as a starting wide receiver there, I think, just because they won't roll out Zay Jones. Waller had 24% target share this game. I know he had 11 targets, which people were saying it's his most targets since week 1 without Henry Ruggs is going to be so much better, but his target share this week wasn't that much different from his target share on the season, which is 25%. So I'm still just expecting similar production for Darren Waller, like 14 to 16 points per game. Jacobs is an RB2. The receiving usage is decent. It's a 9% target share. It's very similar to last year. Kenyon Drake's like a Walmart version of Kareem Hunt. He has 5+ targets in half of his games this year. So just something to consider there. Like, he's a desperate flex play if you really need it, because sometimes he's just getting targeted a lot.
So looking at the New York Giants here, if we are talking about running backs, because we saw Devontae Booker get a full workload with Saquon Barkley out, we saw what they did when Saquon Barkley was in, and they used him a lot. And he's already prolific talent, and we know what talent can do with an opportunity share. They can make it high-end production, and they don't have to rely on it as much because they're just so talented. So we have players or running backs with a 70% opportunity share and a 12% target share. We get DeAndre Swift, Naji Harris, Alvin Kamara, Saquon Barkley, David Montgomery. And among those 5, Saquon Barkley is the 4th highest valued on Keep Trade Cut, and he's closer to David Montgomery in value than he is to DeAndre Swift and a Naji Harris. And it might even be Alvin Kamara, who's RB5, and Saquon's an RB9. So it's something where you should be buying Saquon because there's all that talent, and they absolutely use him. The usage is just insane. You shouldn't worry about injury prone. I mean, I just hit earlier on how Joe Mixon is kind of making everyone that said injury prone is a real thing kind of look a little foolish, because he's finishing as a middling RB1, and we know that Saquon can finish as a high-end RB1. You just have to get rid of the injuries first. But looking at players who played, it was really weird to see Kyle Rudolph was the leading target earner in this game, 29.4% target share, which is just really weird. And Jones is coming back down from a really hot start. He's starting to play a lot more like he did last year. Last year, he had a 74.4 PFF passing grade. This year, it's 73. So it's looking really similar to last year. The Galladay experiment isn't exactly working. I mean, last game, 11.8% target share. That's brutal. And then Kadarius Toney, 5.9%. I mean, the weapons they're adding just aren't exactly producing. I mean, it's Sterling Shepard, and he's not even healthy right now, as the only person with a 20% target share that's on this team. So the players that they brought in are just not making an impact.
Yeah, and Evan Ingram. On Keep Trade Cut, Ingram is lower than guys like Tyler Conklin, Donald Parham, other players like CJ Uzama. What are you doing? Ingram has a terrific history of producing as a mid tight end 1 or a low tight end 1 at worst, and people have soured on him so quickly. I know he hasn't been terrific to start the year, but he's made some plays, earned some targets. Not as good as his previous years, but he's a free agent after this year. I really do think he gets signed to be a decent contributor to a team, and from there, I think we could see him go back to being a low tight end 1, or at very worst, a high tight end 2. And that's a lot better than I can say for CJ Uzama or Donald Parham's outlook or Tyler Conklin's outlook. So I would like to, I'm probably going to go try to add more Evan Ingram over the course of the next couple weeks because people are just souring on him so quickly.
Yeah, I have a good amount of shares of Evan Ingram because he's essentially free. Like when you talk about people like CJ Uzama and Darnold Parham, guys who just likely won't increase in value and are so low in value that he's just hanging around there with them. Like we've seen Evan Ingram produce. I mean, this is his worst season to date in terms of earning targets and being a true talent. So he's definitely someone you should look into buying for basically nothing.
Yeah, CJ Uzama is 20. I know he's in like his 6th season, right? He's 28, coming off an Achilles injury last year. He's made some plays, got a couple long touchdowns, a couple broken plays, but why are people valuing CJ Uzama higher than Evan Ingram? It blows my mind. You should probably go buy low on Evan Ingram just because even if you don't like him, you have to admit to yourself that he's had a decent history of production and he's a former first rounder. He's a guy that, I don't know, teams inquired about him before the deadline. There's a guy probably going to get a decent deal in free agency, so leads to more opportunity than a guy like CJ Uzama, who's a 4th target on his team or 5th target on his team. At the worst, you should like him more than CJ Uzama. The next game, the Patriots against the Panthers. Over the last 5 weeks, Damian Harris was a bit banged up through the first couple weeks, but over the last 5 weeks, the Patriots are dead last in neutral pass frequency, which just hurts everyone. Jacoby Myers is still sitting like a 24% target share, but he's really just like a wide receiver 3 or 4 with this horrible volume. And no one else is startable. Jonnu Smith only ran 4 routes this week. He's barely on the field. When he is on the field, they're asking him to block more than they're asking him to catch passes. Hunter Henry, he had a couple good games with a touchdown, but he's really not startable. Damian Harris he's a good sell just because he's a low upside player. Doesn't have much receiving work. He's being used less in the receiving game than guys like Brandon Bolden or Ramondre Stevenson. So they really don't want to use him as a receiver, even though he's the best running back they have. He has a touchdown every game. Probably isn't sustainable. There's a lower floor. RBs can get injured. They can get replaced. Damian Harris isn't some established stud, so if you can sell him at like RB 24-ish prices for guys like, if you can add a little bit to move up to like a Josh Jacobs, or add a little bit to get to, or like you could even get a pick if you want to downgrade to Miles Sanders, who's lower in value. So, or if you want to get another wide receiver for him, there's a lot of options that you have for selling Damian Harris, who has probably a low floor and it definitely has a low ceiling.
Yeah, I agree with all that. The thing with Damian Harris, like you said, is he just doesn't catch passes. And so if he's not falling in the end zone, which is something you definitely can't rely on, then he's not very productive for you. And for someone like Miles Sanders, who actually gets good usage, he's not the most talented back. But when he's a 60% op share guy and a 12% target share guy, you could trade and get a pick using Damian Harris for him, that's definitely a move that you should be making. And then looking at Carolina in this New England game, Darnold now has 3 games with a under 50 PFF grade, which is really, really not good. And it's funny now to see the masses like, oh, can't believe what just happened to Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold, what do I do with him after buying for a first? Because he was worth a first at the beginning of the year because people are choosing 3-game sample sizes over 4 years, 3-4 year sample sizes. So that's true for a lot of things, but Sam Darnold's just the newest member to crash of that. And then looking at Christian McCaffrey, who just came back, he came back to a 59.4% op share, 17.2% target share, just extremely good usage. I mean, Christian McCaffrey is likely the RB1 rest of season if he stays healthy. DJ Moore in this, though, straight alpha, 29.3% on the season. It's just when you have Sam Darnold throwing and they aren't getting a lot of touchdowns, it's hard for DJ Moore, or even just Sam Darnold throwing for yards, it's hard for DJ Moore to get going despite earning such a high target share. And he's someone like Terry McLaurin, who because of quarterbacks are always going to be a buy because they're this perennial talent that'll produce, They just have an offense that isn't allowing their fantasy numbers to blossom into the elite of the elite like their profile says they should. And then just one more piece on Carolina. Terrace Marshall Jr. is just not earning targets whatsoever or producing. And I don't think you're wrong for panicking, but still think he's a hold if you have him, because what exactly are you selling him for? What's the right price? I mean, we want to see the full rookie landscape or full rookie scope when it comes to a guy like Terrace Marshall Jr., because we want to predict what's going to happen. He's likely a face planner, but I'd just hold.
Yeah, if you can get like a mid to late second and then get Marshall in a third, get a third just as a throw-in. Maybe you don't even ask for a third. If they say yes, take it, but don't haggle over a third-round pick. Do that, because if he face plants, you could probably still sell him for a second, or give a third and Marshall and get a second, which really isn't that much that really isn't that much to give up if he does face plant. And there's still upside for the rest of the season, just because we're only halfway through the year. He was in concussion protocol. The QB is bad. The offense is bad. So there's really a lot of bad things surrounding his situation, as well as his inability to command targets right now. So there's still definite upside, and I wouldn't start panicking now. That could come after the season. I really don't think his value changes that much from now to the end of the season. If he continues to play this way, people just keep moving him a little bit more down the ranks, but there's still definitely upside that I'd be willing to pay a mid to late second for, especially when this class looks like it's gonna probably have very little appealing prospects after like the 202 to the 204 range. So if you can give a pick after that to get Marshall, I would probably be into that. And now with Sam Darnold likely to miss a few weeks, they're going to PJ Walker, who, if you look at EPA per play and completion percentage over expected graphs, he's like in the bottom left corner, and he's one of the worst QBs to start over the last couple of years. And so this offense is going to be really limited. So over the next couple of weeks, if you can use that to buy some DJ Moore, I'm absolutely taking advantage of that. Next game, the Buffalo Bills against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Really bad game for the Buffalo offense. Not something to worry about. Emmanuel Sanders over the last few weeks has consistently had more routes than Stephon Diggs. He's a good win now target in what's normally a really good high volume offense. So it's not something that I'm really that worried for Stephon Diggs, just because we know he's a good player. But his target share on the year, it's obviously around like 23-24%, which isn't ideal. I think he finishes like a wide receiver 2. So when you expect him to be a high end wide receiver 1 going into the season, that's not ideal. You can maybe look to move on from him if you want to get younger, if you want to rebuild. But I'm not panicking on him, just because we've seen him be productive week after week, and not really any ceiling games yet, but they'll come. Moss is in concussion protocol, I believe, if I remember correctly. Singletary's probably an RB2 without him, just because he's getting good usage in the passing game. He'll get the rushing work, 63% route participation in the game when Moss left early. So he needs to start Devin Singletary, then I wouldn't be too afraid to do so.
Yeah, and then this was kind of a real doozy of a fantasy game because there just wasn't very much offense. But looking at Jacksonville Jaguars in terms of like a season-long scope, Visca on the season, 6.7 ADOT and 20.4% target share, which the ADOT was the concern coming in, and it doesn't help that he's basically matching exactly what he did his rookie year in terms of ADOT, 6.6 last year. The good thing is his target share has gone up. It's gone up just under 6%. But the value's clearly dropped. He's someone that I'm holding. He clearly has a low ceiling because the ADOT problems are ADOT problems, and they're hard to predict when they'll go away, and they likely aren't going away because we just saw from rookie to sophomore season, it's basically the same Laviska. But he's someone I'm holding because there are brighter days ahead. This offense will be better. Trevor Lawrence is still a rookie quarterback. He's going to have some good games like he's had, and he's going to have some games where he has a 52.4 PFF grade like he did last week. But the offense will be better, hopefully, with a better T-Law. And then I think Visca's value will at least start to rise to a part where you can be comfortable with or you can sell. But now is definitely the time that you're holding because you don't want to take this this crazy sunk cost on him when he's really not that bad of a talent. He's just a low ceiling player.
Yeah, and I believe that Dan Arnold is leading the team in targets since they traded for him, which is absolutely amazing to see for me, a guy who stashed a bunch of Dan Arnold over the offseason. Not for any reason, just because he's an athletic former wide receiver. But I had a lot of him in Dynasty, so it's good to see him get some usage. He's probably a high tight end 2 for the rest of the season, just because his target share is usable for fantasy. So I'm really excited to see bench stash develop into a starting option. Dan Arnold's another guy. I hate to say it, but he's another guy higher than Evan Ingram in keep your cut rankings. So maybe that's a move you can make. Just because one's doing well, came out of nowhere, and then another's not doing well, but has a better history of production. The Minnesota game, this Dalvin Cook situation that came out earlier today is really weird. I don't know. Obviously, going to wait for a lot more details before saying anything about it. But if Dalvin Cook was to miss time, Madison is an RB1 because he sees tremendous volume while Dalvin Cook doesn't play. So if Dalvin Cook does miss time, then Madison's probably an RB1, but he's also probably a sell in Dynasty, just because if you can get a first out of him, or like mid to late second, 22 first, or even any 23 first, that's a terrific deal that you can make, just because Madison for the long term probably isn't going to be worth that, or an RB1 in the long term. But Justin Jefferson's had a couple down weeks. I wouldn't worry about it on the season. He still has a 25% target share, 16.6 points per game. Really nothing to worry about. Justin Jefferson, who's had a couple down weeks. Adam Thielen's still a decent trade target just because he has a high week-to-week ceiling. He's a lot of red zone targets. He's a wide receiver 2 or to a wide receiver 3 just because touchdown variance. He has upside as a low wide receiver 1 just because of his red zone usage, but he's another good win now target because his price is so depreciated because he's obviously hit that age curve.
Yeah, and then speaking of running backs on the other side, do you remember Tyson Williams and when you could get a second-round pick for him? And now he gets snaps, but he had a 0% opportunity share last week, and things are just not looking great. So it just goes to show that if you can flip running backs for a second, especially ones that have no production or track record of production, for seconds, you always do it, because right now you'd probably be lucky to get a 4th-round pick for him. But the backfield here is still just really gross splits between, there's no Latavius Murray, so Devontae Freeman saw about 50% of the ops, and Le'Veon Bell saw about 30+% of the ops. So and they don't see targets from Lamar Jackson, so it's really non-sexy. It's just a backfield that you want to avoid, in my opinion. And then their wide receivers and their pass catchers, Marquise Brown, 29.3% target share in week 9 and a 24.6% on the season. So he's acting as the Ravens alpha. And I remember in the offseason kind of comparing him and Deonte's profile, and it didn't make sense because their value was so far apart. And now we're seeing both of them be alphas on their team, and their keep trade cut value is much closer than it was at the very beginning of the season when people were just very down on Marquise Brown. So it's really good to see. And then Rashad Bateman, he had a 19.5% target share, 1.27 yards per team pass attempt in week 9, which is really good to see. And through his 4 games on the season, a 13.3% target share, 1.07 yards per team pass attempt. I mean, he's right on track for having a good rookie season despite missing most of the early season. So it's really good to see that he's on track. And then Lamar Jackson, just a cheat code. I mean, he's going to have lots of weeks like this. 30.6 PPR, which was good for QB2, and then on the season he's QB4 on the season. I mean, it's just Lamar being Lamar.
Yeah. Since Rashad Bateman came back a few weeks ago, I believe that him, Hollywood, and Andrews have just under 80% of the team's total targets, which is terrific because concentrated passing offense is amazing for fantasy football. And the volume's a lot better now that their RBs suck and Lamar is passing really well. So it's I don't think it's entirely because their RBs are hurt, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. I don't think it's entirely because they're hurt, missing the entire season. I think it's also because Lamar Jackson is continually getting better as a passer. that not only helps his upside for fantasy football, it also helps the upside of everyone else in that offense. Hollywood Brown is on pace to be the Ravens' first wide receiver one season in like 20 plus years, which is hilarious, but also good to see because the volume's good, and all three of these weapons can be startable assets in fantasy football. The next game, the Chargers against the Eagles. Mike Williams, after week 3, has had an ADOT of 18, 15.5, 16.2, 14.0, and 13.4. I know some people aren't worried about Mike Williams, but I think I definitely am, just because this is the role that we saw him be in for his first 4 seasons in the league. His people are still clinging to a 3-week sample size, just like they did for Sam Darnold. People love their 3-week sample sizes, but they're still clinging to the 3-week sample size when he had a more expanded route tree, a lower ADOT, and more production. And I would look to, you can maybe cash out for prices of between wide receiver 24 and wide receiver 30. Definitely not encouraging that his ADOT has skyrocketed and the production has come down, just because this is the Mike Williams of old. In that stretch, Keenan Allen has a 28% target share in 3 out of 5 of those games. And that's definitely a buy for contenders, just because that leads to high-end wide receiver 1 numbers. Wide receiver 26 price in Dynasty. Herbert had a nice bounce back after a couple down weeks. This week he was first in completion percentage over expected and expected points added per play. Herbert's still a top 8 Dynasty quarterback and supporting some terrific weapons. Eckler had a bit of a down week, still a top 5 running back. The really only thing that I'm adjusting for this offense is moving Mike Williams down, just because the role is changing. And when the role reverts back to what it was for 4 years, that's something you have to take notice, something you can't ignore.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Williams is Mike Williams. It was really encouraging to see those first 3 weeks, and we saw his ADOT lower, which obviously helped him earn more targets and a higher target share. But at some point, you have to realize that Mike Williams is just being Mike Williams, and you can't rely on a 3-game sample size to go off of for the reason that you like him. So looking at Philadelphia in this one, 17 pass attempts is just gross. Like, that is really gross. It's really hard to see a lot of production when you're passing that few of times. So even like Goddard and Devontae have 30-plus target shares in that week just aren't that productive, because 17 pass attempts is really not that much. They're not eating a big pie. They're sharing a fat share of a really small pie, which is something you really don't like to see from offenses. But in terms of the metrics, Devonte Smith has been really good this season. A 25.2% target share, 2.08 yards per team pass attempt is like really good, especially for a beta and a kind of coin flip beta, as he is in Drew's rankings. I had him as a low ceiling beta. So it's really good to see and really promising to see from him. And it's something that's good to see because we know that the options in this passing offense aren't good. So for him to be that much better than him in his rookie season is really good to see. And we've already hit on Miles Sanders, but 68.5% op share, 12.4% target shares is technical averages, which are really good. And like we said, when you can trade Damian Harris back to get Miles Sanders plus like a 3rd-round pick or something, you should do it, because this is the type of volume and usage that you want to chase, not a Damian Harris who doesn't catch passes, because we know that targets lead to production, because targets eventually equal receptions, which equal points. And when you don't get those, you don't have much of a floor if you're not falling in the end zone. And then Hurts in this game, he's been all right. A 76.6 PFF on the season is not bad by any stretch. It's a really good improvement from last year. So it's going to be interesting, because we know they're not tied to him because he doesn't have the draft capital. They're not doing well, so they're likely to have a top pick, which is why we see Hurts as this kind of questioned. I'm sure we see once production stops mattering, Jalen Hurts in the offseason will have value plummet, because there's going to be skepticism. I mean, we see it every year with quarterbacks who are skepticism. Once the fantasy points stop coming in, like with Hurts, who's still QB8 on the season, thanks to his high-end Konami code. But once we see the production and fantasy points not mattering as we go into an offseason, and then it's filled with skepticism, like imagine it's already been bad for Jalen Hurts in terms of rumors and his job security question marks. Imagine what it'll be when they aren't playing games and fantasy points don't matter. So if you're not a contender, don't think you have Jalen Hurts who's a young quarterback, it's going to be a good thing because the value is going to fall in the offseason. That's almost a guarantee.
Yeah. For Miles Sanders, you can trade Damian Harris down, but I was looking at the keep trade cut rankings just now because I was thinking about Damian Harris and other RBs in his range. If you can trade Damian Harris to get Leonard Fournette, I think that's a move that you should definitely make because Leonard Fournette, he's a free agent after this year. For the rest of the season, he's going to see low RB1 usage, but he's a free agent after this year. I could absolutely see him re-signing to be their workhorse again. Ronald Jones also a free agent after this year. I think Giovanni Bernard too. And so Leonard Fournette, I think you could have 2 to 3 years of terrific production for a lower price than a lot of other RBs who were expected to see that production. And so you can trade Damian Harris, who has a low ceiling and probably a low floor, for Leonard Fournette, who admittedly probably has a relatively low floor compared to other running backs who have his type of ceiling, but he does have a higher ceiling than a lot of RBs in his area of value. Little side note, little deviation from the topic, but I just felt like that was important to note because we're still going to talk about Leonard Fournette every week, even on Tampa Bay's bye week. The next game, the Green Bay Packers game against the Kansas City Chiefs. Love's first start wasn't great, but it was still his first start. Negative 3.6 completion percentage over expected it wasn't great. I'd still lean to maybe buying, depending on the price, because in Superflex, QBs matter, and he's a former first rounder. It's not like he's a second rounder like, I don't know, Drew Lock, who got cast aside really quickly. Although he wasn't a great prospect, they're going to be committed to him. They spent a first rounder on him, which will lead to usage eventually down the road. I think Rodgers leaves after this season just because the situation with his Packers aren't great. And so because he's a starting QB, you'll only see the price increase from now until he's probably starting next year. So if you can sell Teddy Bridgewater, Jimmy Garoppolo to get him, I think that's a move that you should absolutely make. Rodgers, obviously, when he comes back, will be a boost to this offense. Adams had a 44% target share last week. Very good player, obviously. From weeks 4 to 9, A.J. Dillon has 61 carries to Jones 75. So we're looking like a 60-40-ish split, just doing some mental math. Jones' receiving work still keeps him as an RB1, but it's probably not as high of a ceiling as we've seen in the previous years.
It was really surprising this last game to see A.J. Dillon have twice as many targets as Jones did because Jones's upside comes from the receiving work that he gets in a good offense because we already know he's not some high usage guy, rushing usage guy. So it does make sense. And it is something that we entertained is that A.J. Dillon is someone who could come in and take a Jamal Williams role where you see like 40% of the ops and you just don't see a lot of pass catching work. But last week, it was definitely interesting to see that A.J. Dillon was kind of the pass-catching back over Jones. It's definitely not something that sticks, but it's something that's interesting to see. Kansas City, on the other side, Mahomes just still hasn't found it. 61.3 PFF grade in Week 9, and that's his highest since Week 6, where he had a 64.3. So it's a really weird situation. I mean, I want to be able to look back and kind of see if we've had these situations before. I just haven't got to it, I guess, or looked through it. But 69.7 on the season. That's 23 out of 35, but he's still QB 11 in points per game. So it's still a good offense despite him not being exactly very good so far. It's just really weird stuff to see from someone who's kind of been a generational producer at such a young age. So I'm still confident he's going to find it. I'm still confident in the Chiefs offense because we've seen it for so long. I'm just trusting the larger sample size. But, I mean, at some point it's pretty weird what's going on with Patrick Mahomes because he's the one that's not producing. It's not the other options on this team. Tyreek, 28.3% target share on the season. I mean, that's an absolute alpha share, and it's really good to see if you have Tyreek because for what we've known, especially every year, these targets are very, very valuable. They just aren't as valuable as years past. So, and then Kelsey's just performing like the beta, 22.2% target share. So it just made me question if they were switching roles this season or what's going on because usually we see Kelsey as the alpha, Tyreek as the beta, and it's just not the way it's gone this season. It's Mahomes hasn't been in Mahomes this season. So really, really weird situation.
I think Kelsey is, I don't think he's hitting the production curve yet in terms of production dipping because of age, but I do think that his value will eventually start to fall a little bit because of his age, because he's 31 and not having 20 points per game like he did last season. It's like 16 now, so I think eventually he'll start sliding down rankings. For Mahomes, I went to go check key trade cut to see like if how his value's falling, so that I could say go buy low on Patrick Mahomes, because the sample size of him being great for 3 years is a lot larger than the sample size of him not being great for the last couple weeks. But his value on keep trade cut for Superflex is still 999, which is the highest it can be. So obviously the masses are not panicking on Patrick Mahomes, and neither should you, because he's still a great player. We have a large sample size of him being elite, so don't worry about Mahomes if you need to hear that, which it seems that the majority of people don't need to hear that because his value hasn't changed on keep trade cut. But if you need to hear that, you're welcome. The Arizona Cardinals game against the San Francisco 49ers, James Conner is a workhorse without Chase Edmonds. He wasn't running a lot of routes or seeing a lot of receiving work prior to the Edmonds injury, but Edmonds suffered a high ankle sprain on the first play of the game. Probably out for 4 to 6 weeks. Tough for his situation, because high ankle sprains, not only does it keep him out for that period of time, it also impacts how performance upon return. So the rest of the season, I really do think we see Chase Edmonds being limited. Probably not as much rushing work, probably not as effective in the rushing department, and really just not the Chase Edmonds we saw earlier in the season, who was an RB2, which just leads to James Conner, who can probably continue being some type of workhorse even when Edmonds comes back. But without Edmonds, he's going to be seeing RB1 usage, RB1 opportunity shares, obviously getting a lot of goal line work, and then now with more receiving work and a really good offense, it's hard not to like him. If he was one of your targets in zero RB teams like he was for me, I think you just hit the jackpot, because this is tremendous upside as we enter the playoff stretch. Rondo Moore has some chatter that he's a sell because of low ADOT, but I wouldn't worry yet, because we had him all of us had him as a good prospect coming into the year. He's playing well in his first season. He's earning targets pretty well. He's not on the field all the time just because they don't run as many 4 wide receiver sets, and normally they have AJ Green and DeAndre Hopkins, but he's earning targets well in his first season. Kirk's a free agent after this season. AJ Green's a free agent after this season. I do think that this is not the time to sell. You can reevaluate at the end of the year, maybe if Kirk and Green leave and narratives start pushing his value up towards like wide receiver 24 or 20 range, like they were like after your second game of the season. But then if you could sell for like a first, then I think you actually should take that, because he's a low ceiling player, we believe, just because his ADOT is so low. Kirk being a free agent after this year, I do think that he could be viable for another team, have some decent production that you can get relatively cheap now, around like wide receiver 50 prices, which I like. But yeah, it's just a kind of a weird game where the offense didn't change much, even though they lost their best pass catcher and their quarterback. Just excited to see what James Conner can do with increased opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, they still beat up on San Francisco, which is kind of embarrassing for San Francisco, I would say. But in this game, it was very good to see from the San Francisco side that Debo, 23.1% target share, Kittle, 20.5%, and Ayuk, 20.5%, which is a lot closer to what we expected it to be at the beginning of the season than what it's been. In the last 2 weeks, Ayuk, 22.7% target share, 1.97 yards per team pass attempt. There's a point where even I was getting a little worried with Ayuk, but with his prolific rookie season and how good he was, and then these last 2 weeks we're starting to see the Brandon Ayuk that we saw last year come out. I think it's people are selling because they think this is a good sell window for them. He's done a little bit. It's going to be easier to sell, and I think if you can get him for a mid-second or anything like that, I would definitely like to do that, because we saw how good Ayuk was last year, and we're kind of just seeing him hopefully flip the switch here. The signs have been encouraging, and when you can get him for a second-round pick, that's definitely a move that I would like to make. Mitchell in this game, another really good thing to see was he had a 12.8% target share, and that's kind of been the thing with Mitchell, is he's been really good on the ground, and the San Francisco run offense has been really good on the ground. He's been the reason for that, or not the reason, but he's been the recipient of that. But to see that he's involved in the pass game, at least last week, was just really encouraging signs, and kind of wheels up for Mitchell the rest of the season.
Yeah, for Ayuk, I do think that I don't think you'll find a lot of people selling, just because people who had him probably invested in him at a lot higher prices over the offseason, and I don't think after a couple good games they probably weathered the storm or maybe even bought when he had the bad patch to start the season. I don't think they would sell right when he's starting to heat up, but definitely if you can still get him for that price, I think that's definitely something you should try to do, because this is more of what we expected going into the year, and it's terrific to see, because it's like we said with the Ravens passing offense. Concentrated passing offense can be good for all three options. Just because you have three good players in an offense doesn't mean that one of them dips below fantasy football relevance. You can see that offenses players earn a target share. Players earn their target share. So if you have guys who all will earn above a 20% target share, you'll just see all those players be fantasy football relevant, most likely. Then the next game, the Titans against the Rams on Sunday Night Football. Crazy upset against the Rams. But in the first game without Henry, McNichols ran the most routes, had the most receiving work. This was expected, just like from yards per carry, which isn't a great stat, but also just watching Deonte Foreman look better than Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson was horribly inefficient, didn't do much. He fell in the end zone, which was good if you started him, but he had like 10 carries for 21 yards. That's absolutely horrible. It's a really messy backfield. I wouldn't start anyone from it, especially not Adrian Peterson, who's probably going to need to fall into the end zone just to be relevant. If I'm starting anyone, maybe McNichols is a desperate flex in really deep leagues or leagues where I have a lot of flex spots, but Adrian Peterson's he's just like the Ravens running backs, where they're dusty and old, but they see opportunity and they don't see receiving work, and you just have to hope they fall into the end zone, which is really hard to count on. AJ Brown had a 43% target share this game, which was absolutely amazing. His target share has been terrific over the last few weeks, and it's a really small sample size of only one game, but this game they were 12th in neutral pass frequency for the week. So if they're going to pass a lot more without Derrick Henry, it's something I'm absolutely excited to see, because AJ Brown has a tremendous ceiling with the rate he's earning targets and more offensive volume.
Yeah, and from the Rams' perspective, who really didn't play good at all. For what it's worth, it was Stafford's worst passing game of the season, but we know who Stafford is. I mean, he's shown us this year and the 12 other years of his career. So it's just one of those blips that's going to happen in the NFL, and it's definitely not something that you think about going into Week 10 or anything like that. And similarly to what I talk about, or we talk about, where everything will regress to the mean, especially when you get hot starts and slow starts. Bobby Trees is currently a wide receiver too, like he's been basically every season that he's been on the Rams. So regression is pretty funny how that works, especially when there's panic. Is Van Jefferson the new guy? Is Robert Woods? What's happened to Robert Woods? He's a wide receiver too in points per game on the season. So really not surprising, because that's exactly where we expect him to be. But what we didn't expect was Target Hog Cup to be a real thing. And now we're through 9 weeks. He had another week of a 30+% target share. A 34.8% on the season is second only to Devonte Adams. So it looks like Cup is here to stay. But if you're not contending, Cup is someone who the profile and everything just doesn't make a lot of sense, and there's not a lot of safety in it. So if you are not a clear-cut contender and Cup's kind of been carrying you, he's someone that you could trade for a fortune, and I don't think you'll regret it. But that being said, he's going to produce as a top 5, top 10 wide receiver rest of season, most likely.
Yeah, a lot of win now value is pumped up. Keep trade cut doesn't reflect this, just because keep trade cut often heavily skews towards youth. But if you're looking at win now teams and they have a young producer like AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, probably not Jamar Chase just because of the start he's having, but also DK Metcalf. If you can get one of them for Cooper Kupp, I can almost guarantee that they'll have more value at the end of the season, barring any like crazy injuries or any crazy dip in production, which we don't expect to happen. I can almost guarantee that those guys will have more value at the end of the season. So while the keep trade cut or other dynasty calculators might not say that that's a trade that most people take, every league has their own individual value. It's worth looking into, just because some team who's win now might understand the value of trying to win now and might slightly overpay to get a wide receiver who has insane production.
Yeah, I love all those moves. I mean, even another one, if I could trade Cooper Kupp to get DJ Moore plus the first, maybe.
Terrific, yeah.
Yeah.
Terry McLaurin as well. It's just some really good moves you can make just because right now both of their production is suppressed by their horrible situations. And we expect them to be, hopefully, we expect them to be a lot better at producing when they have actual good QBs and actually good offenses. The Chicago Bears game, a few weeks ago we said don't panic on any of the rookies just because rookies tend to get better over the season, and we see that now over the last couple of weeks. Justin Fields is 4th in completion percentage over expected and 2nd in PFF passing grade. Rookies, obviously, they get better as the season goes on. It also has 18 rush attempts over the last couple of weeks, so redraft, if someone dropped him, I think he's definitely worth looking into to add just because there is some good rushing floor, and if he starts to pass well, there's a good amount of ceiling. Komet has a 19% target share. He's tight end 2 for the rest of the season. The offensive volume is bad, but Komet's a guy I'm looking to possibly buy in Dynasty just because his target share is really encouraging in his second season. His value is being held down because the offense is bad, but it's a really good target share in his second season. Mooney on the year has a 25% target share. It's pretty encouraging. I had this debate with Adiko and Drew in the Discord the other day about Darnell Mooney. I think eventually he'll turn up as a buy, but I get their point of view of waiting, of not buying right now. I'd say that I would hold or float like a mid to late second for him just because his peripherals at the end of the season will look like a strong buy if his price continues to be suppressed by this low volume offense like it is. And also Allen Robinson, they're all guys that their situation is probably going to get better going into next year. Allen Robinson's a buy for 2022, not because the offensive volume is going to get better for him, just because he's probably going to go to a new team next year. And we know he's a good player from his years of producing as a wide receiver 1. I don't know why he's not commanding targets at the same rate he has over the last few years, but I'm still looking to buy him just because he has a tremendous history of production, a tremendous history of earning targets, and his price is just continually falling just because the production isn't there right now, and he's an older player. So some people are looking to get out from him just because he's an older player who's not producing right now. Montgomery, upon return, had a 75% opportunity share. Don't worry about Khalil Herbert. He's really a backup. Montgomery, maybe a strong buy. You had him in the conversation with guys with what was it said for the threshold for opportunity share and target share?
70% opportunity share plus and a 12% target share plus.
There you go. That'll lead to, at worst, low RB1 numbers, and Montgomery's still valued as an RB2 on KJ Cut. You can buy Montgomery. He's still a workhorse.
Yeah, he's may not be the most efficient back with what he does, but he's getting a lot of usage, and that's what matters in the receiving game as well, which is what really matters. And like we both said, he's in that upper echelon of high usage players, just like a guy on the opposite side of that game, Naji Harris. But Naji Harris just insane. A 91% opportunity share on the season is pretty ridiculous. You don't see that very often at all, especially from a rookie. And he's someone who's also, and even more so, not as efficient with it, which I've seen the argument a lot about Naji Harris, like produces and all this, and the debate that he's not as talented. I think when you get to a value like Naji Harris has now, you're primed, or it's fair to have even more so ridicule to it. So when he's not efficient with it, that makes you very less comfortable spending such high capital on a back that's not efficient with such high usage. But when you get later in value and the usage is there, even if they're not as efficient as a runner or a receiver or anything like that, then the usage is there and it's cheap. It's cheap production, but that's just not the case with Naji Harris, which is where I think the debate and the conversation kind of gets twisted. Is his value so high that he should be held to those nitpicks, or because you're spending a ton of value, especially in a startup. He's like a first round startup guy, early second. Like that's a lot of capital. That's a lot of your team. So you want him to be really efficient with his usage, not just that he's getting that usage. But another player on this offense who's kind of deserves some ridicule, at least for how high he's getting in value in terms to where he started, is Pat Freiermuth. We're now seeing above Noah Fant, which is just crazy. We've seen Freiermuth produce, but even on the year, 12.5% target share, 0.91 yards per team pass attempt that's wasteland tight end. It's good to see for a rookie, especially because his profile really isn't that bad. It's actually a pretty solid profile. But you're talking about someone over Noah Fant who is on the track to be a really good tight end, and he's way closer than Freiermuth is. And another thing for Freiermuth is they haven't had Eric Ebron. Eric Ebron comes back week 10. I think you'll kind of start to see the buzz around him at least die down a little bit, like it will with most rookie tight ends. I even saw someone today that give a late one to buy Freiermuth, and I was like, I would smash that. I would absolutely smash that because there's going to be a lot of times where you can get Freiermuth, especially in the offseason most likely, for a lot cheaper than a first.
Yeah, Freiermuth is a guy that is really benefiting from Ebron being out just because he's being deployed so much more, but there's a good chance that they just return to a 50-50 split in routes when Ebron's back. I don't think it's out of the question. The value could definitely fall over the next few weeks just because of that. And I do think that Freiermuth's value, at least his production, you might have like a good second-year leap or a third-year leap, but I think for now his value and production is going to be at best like wasteland tight end. So I don't think that you can project huge value increase. I don't think you see much of a production increase. So there's really no reason to buy right now. I think the value is at a relative ceiling.
And then looking at the wide receiver core, Deonte Johnson, 29.2% target share on the season. Claypool, 20.5% target share on the season, which that's really not that much of an upgrade from what we saw Claypool last year in because he was a rather productive rookie. But I also still find it somewhat encouraging because that's still a 20% target share, and it's coming from a quarterback with such a low ADOT. And we know that Claypool isn't a low ADOT player. He's a 12 ADOT player. He's right on the cusp of that kind of sketchy downfield role without being in it. And Big Ben's just been a chuck down Charlie if you look at his ADOT. So it's not quite Mike White or anything like that or Colt McCoy, but Big Ben is someone who maybe with the quarterback change where we see the ADOT increase, we get more excited about someone like Chase Claypool because he's still 20% of targets, especially as a second-year player, is still a really good thing.
Yeah, that is good. Wow. And then Deonte, he's a target hog. It's tremendous.
Yeah, he really is.
I would take him over Debo, Godwin, and Pittman, who are all in the similar range of values.
For what it's worth, so Godwin's producing as a wide receiver 1 right now, and he's valued as a wide receiver 1.
Yeah.
I think he's someone that I really have no shares of. He's pretty sketchy to me.
I have one just because I got Keenan Allen. I traded Keenan Allen. I don't know how I pulled it off. I just straight up got Godwin for Keenan Allen, which is tremendous value bump. But Godwin's he's like a fake alpha that no one calls a fake alpha. But then once people start calling him a fake alpha, and then everyone will see because he's going to move on to a new team, I think. I don't know how the Bucs cap situation is, but
yeah, his highest target share in his 4 years in the career, not counting this one's 21.7%.
Right, exactly. And the only time he's more than wide receiver 1, more than wide receiver 2 numbers is he's really efficient 2019. And this year, if he keeps it up, and if AB continues to not play, he'll end up as a wide receiver 1 most likely. But that's with an offense that's pacing for the most volume Tom Brady's pacing for the most pass attempts in NFL history, and he's also playing MVP caliber football, and that'll lead to an offense being really good, efficient, and high volume, which will support a lot of fantasy opportunity.
Definitely agreed with you there. He doesn't really profile as a wide receiver 1. He's just in such an amazing situation, and at his age, I think it's why he has that wide receiver 1 value tag.
I think he'd move him into a sell. I think because I don't know. It's as we get into the offseason, we'll get more clarity on what's going to happen with him, if he's going to stay or if he's going to leave. I think his value takes a hit. His value and production takes a hit if he leaves, and it's really hard to count on that just because the floor is a lot lower in terms of value. But I think that spiel aside, I think that about wraps it up for the week. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the R Squared Fantasy Football Podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. If you did, be sure to go down, like, subscribe, follow if you're on streaming sites. Thank you for listening or watching, and have a great rest of your week. Good luck.
Have a good one.